Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, the new report has revealed that a significant number of British young people aged between 16 to 25 are worried they won't be able to afford food this winter as the cost of living crisis spirals. Daniel Ogoloma, an entrepreneur and Oxford University undergraduate, will be joining me here in the studio to discuss the real impact of the state of the British economy. And several European countries have submitted proposals for new EU sanctions against Iran for suppressing protests. Negin Shirigai, a former broadcaster and women's rights activist, will be joining me from London for more insight into the demonstrations. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. But first, let's start the show with a story that continues to make headlines here in the UK and across the world. The pound rallied against the US dollar earlier in the week after the British Chancellor announced a U-turn on abolishing the top rate of tax for the highest earners. Kwasi Kwarteng confirmed the move to scrap the 45p tax rate was being abandoned following more than a week of criticism.
I know the plan put forward only 10 days ago has caused a little turbulence. I get it. We are listening and have listened. And now I want to focus on delivering the major parts of our growth package. Because with energy bills skyrocketing, a painful COVID aftermath, war on our continent, a 70-year high tax burden, slowing global growth rates, and glacially slow infrastructure delivery, we couldn't simply do nothing. We can't sit idly by. What Britain needs more than ever is economic growth, and a government wholly committed to economic growth. That is why we will forge a new economic deal for Britain, backed by an ironclad commitment to fiscal discipline. More businesses.
Well, earlier I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey for more on this story. Simon, so there's been a devastating U-turn, but then if you're a Conservative, you'll say at least you're listening to the people. How do you think it's gone down for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng?
Yeah, I think that's what Kwasi Kwarteng wants people to think, even though for a long time they've both been saying they're not going to change anything about that mini budget that happened a couple of weeks ago now. I think it is pretty bad, but I think it's not as bad as it would have been had they not done this U-turn. And it's not really the amount of money that they're going to save by doing this, because actually, if you add it all up, it's not that much money. It's more what it looks like as a Conservative government that is saving £3,000 a year for the super rich and not really doing the same for poorer people. And that's what Labour were leaping all over, and that's what they were worried about in the polls. That's why so many polls that we've seen recently is giving Labour a massive lead. So I think they needed to do something, and Kwasi Kwarteng probably fearing for his job. Liz Truss sort of threw him under the bus recently, saying that this wasn't really discussed in Cabinet, wasn't really told to her, so he had to take ownership of this. So yeah, he said that this shows that we're listening. He said it's become a distraction from our overriding mission to tackle the challenges facing our country. We get it, we have listened. So I think that's how they're trying to play it, but it is pretty embarrassing for the government. And as some people say, like, this kind of opens up room for more U-turns in the future, especially if former Tory ministers, really big hitters like Michael Gove and Grant Shapps come out against certain policies, which they did with this one, so they wouldn't vote for it. What then happens? Will this current government then U-turn in the future? And it's also quite interesting that one analyst said that he's never seen Liz Truss. He's worked with Liz Truss a lot. He's never seen her change her mind on almost anything. So this is how bad this was and how bad it was looking for the government. And I guess now opposition leaders calling for him to resign. He says he's not going to do that, but I think it depends what's going to happen over the next few days with the markets. If the markets continue to fall, then we might see that.
Can't get any worse than it was, surely.
Well, you'd say that, yeah. And I think this will have helped a little bit, these kind of things. And obviously the ECB stepping in a week ago with buying government bonds, that helped a bit. But I think, yeah, they're just trying to change the sort of narrative a little bit because it's been so bleak at the moment. and this was a mini budget. It wasn't even a proper budget. This was kind of a, and Liz Truss at the weekend saying, well, we should have laid the groundwork a little bit. We should have maybe prepared markets a little bit for what we're going to do, all these massive unfunded tax cuts. But at the moment, yeah, Kwasi Kwarteng's position does look interesting and shaky at the least.
Yes, interesting and shaky. That's not a description for him either. Are the Conservative Party on the ropes?
Yeah, I think they've got their conference, of course, at the moment, and they'll be looking to kind of shore up support and have a lot of sort of, fist banging and applause at this conference, and they'll have all the big hitters out there trying to sort of slam Labour and their position. I don't think it's been a good start. I don't think anyone would say it's been a good start for Liz Truss. She's only been in office pretty much a couple of days, and yet, talk of letters going in for her resignation and things like that. So I think, she's based it a lot on the economy. She was talking about, how different she was in terms of Rishi Sunak, in terms of her economic position, and how they were not going to, make any cuts. They were going to push on with more borrowing, more spending and tax cuts. And that hasn't really worked. So she's kind of made her bed and she needs to lie in it. And if the economy continues to tank, then who knows what's going to happen. But I think, all Tory ministers will be looking at the markets, looking at the pound and hoping that it does slightly better, because they've been taking a hammering recently.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Let's stay with the political and economic upheaval playing out in British politics. For more insight, I'm now being joined by a sitting member of the UK's House of Lords, Prem Sikka. Can you just make some sense of this, please? Because we spoke to you a couple of weeks ago before Liz Truss was Prime Minister. Millions of people across the UK were desperate for change, sick to the back teeth of the hustings. She came into power, got the £2,500 energy bill guarantee. A couple of people, well, definitely millions, benefited in some shape or form from the mini budget, and then there was market turmoil. What was missing and what shouldn't have been there?
I think the first thing to bear in mind is all we have done is change the face of the Prime Minister. The policy direction has not really changed in any way whatsoever. If anything, it has moved even more to the right. And the energy bill, the support the government is offering, suggesting that the average domestic bill may be around 2,500. Obviously, some people will pay more, some people will pay less. What that has actually done is guaranteed profits for energy companies. Even taking that guarantee into the guarantee to customers into account, household bills would more than double. They have more than doubled within 1 year. Wages have not doubled, salaries have not doubled. And what's happened in the budget, there is hardly anything which would alleviate the hardship faced by many, many, many people. The government says it's cut income tax by 1 penny in the pound. It has abandoned the increase in national insurance contributions. But the hard fact is that there are 21 million adults. That is 42% of adults in the UK who survive on less than £12,570, which means they do not pay income tax, do not pay national insurance. The benefit to them of these changes is actually zero. The government said now is embarking on a policy of cutting public services and the social security support provided to the poor. But we have to remember that there are 41% of the claimants of universal credit are actually at work. So what that means is wages are so low, people can't afford to make ends meet. And even worse, we have nurses and teachers relying on food banks. When I was young in the 70s, a long time ago now, food banks were unheard of. Now there are thousands of them all over, and it is not the social security system, but charities and food banks which are enabling people to survive. And that is the kind of thing this government is not really addressing, and it has indicated that it has no intention of addressing.
Yeah, it's really difficult for people at the moment. I think sometimes that is difficult for our viewers in Nigeria to understand, but certainly millions upon millions of people are going through a cost of living crisis, and these are people that are working as hard as they can. I want to talk about the Labour Party. Last week, a lot of people who were in Liverpool said that there was a sense in the room that they haven't felt since the 90s and the success of Tony Blair. Lord Prem, they are clearly the odds-on favourites to win the next general election. But then, of course, sloganism and campaigning is much more different and difficult than governing. What is going to set Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves apart from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng?
Well, I think Labour, to some extent, are following what I would say Tory light policies. The public opinion is somewhere to the left of Labour at the moment. Public would like to see nationalisation of oil, gas companies, railway companies, water companies, because their profits are adding to our inflation. But nevertheless, Labour is possibly going to move on some of those issues. We will have to wait and see. Labour has opposed the abolition of the 45% band of income tax, which applies to people earning more than 150,000. Now the government has backed off that. But I think what we need is a redistributive agenda. Because if people have more to spend, the economy will automatically thrive. You can't rely upon the top 1%, 10% to build a sustainable economy. So Labour has somewhere further to go. Of course, Labour is doing well in the opinion polls, but I don't think that is really any excuse for complacency. I remember in 1992, Labour was way ahead of the opinion polls. It lost the election. It was also way ahead of the opinion polls in 2019 at one stage, and then Conservatives had a landslide victory. So I think the opinion polls can be actually quite fickle. What appears to me is that at the moment, people may be moving to Labour as a protest against the Conservatives, rather than saying we really believe in the Labour agenda. So I think Labour has a lot of work to do in order to oust this government.
You're absolutely right there, Lord Prem. We've seen it time and time again, not just in this country, but across the world, that the polls can distort. But let's see what happens in Birmingham this week. You know, a week is a long time in politics, as they say. Lord Prem Seeker, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
To other news now, outrage over the death of a young Iranian woman has sparked the biggest wave of protests to rock Iran in almost 3 years. Concern within the international community has also been heightened following security clashes at Tehran's prestigious Sharif University of Technology, where riot police confronted hundreds of students. Solidarity rallies have taken place in more than 150 cities across the globe. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Negin Shiragai, a former broadcaster and women's rights activists. Negin joins me from London. Negin Shiragai, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global to discuss a really important topic. I've just been reading that several European countries have submitted proposals for new EU sanctions against Iran for suppressing protests. Is this the global support that Iranian demonstrators need?
I think it's part of it. It's really important if the European countries are coming together and doing these human rights sanctions. It's a new mechanism that the European Union came up with. And it's been effective, really impactful, especially when they've been doing it around propaganda and, you know, some individuals that's been involved in this kind of discriminations against people. But it needs to be much more than this. One of the things that people are campaigning for, on Saturday, we had a massive demonstration in more than 200 cities around the globe. And one of the demands there was the embassies should be closed down. The UN Human Rights Council should talk about this issue. It's not enough to just release a statement. There should be specifically a session on Iran and crack down on women's rights in Iran. And these are the demands that's been voiced by the diaspora of the Iranians outside Iran, and especially some people inside Iran who have access to voice their concerns as well, been asking people to do that too.
We are certainly going to keep following this story on Channels Business Global because it affects women And, more than half of the world is female, so our rights are fundamental. Negin Shirigai, a women's rights activist and former broadcaster. It's been a pleasure speaking with you on Channel's Business Global today. Thank you, Negin. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, I'll be speaking with Oxford University undergraduate and entrepreneur Daniel Ogoloma about the foggy prospects for young people living in Britain. And I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be speaking with Oxford University undergraduate and entrepreneur Daniel Ogoloma. But until then, here's a breakdown of the biggest business news stories of the week. French manufacturing activity contracted last month at the fastest pace since May 2020, as high energy prices and global uncertainties weighed on order books. Elsewhere, the S&P Global Purchasing Managers Index also published declines in factory activity in Spain. For the third consecutive month, output contracted in September as faltering demand and high inflation had a negative impact on new orders. Rail workers are set to strike again on Saturday this week after the network was crippled on Wednesday as 4 different unions walked out over pay and working demands. Network Rail's chief executive Andrew Haynes has said that despite efforts to find a breakthrough in talks, rail unions remain insistent in causing unnecessary loss of staff pay, passenger disruption and damage to the railway's recovery from the pandemic. Tesla delivered a record 343,830 vehicles in the third quarter of 2022. The figure shows that the electric car manufacturer has bounced back from a slower second quarter, which was hampered by COVID-related factory shutdowns. Deliveries are also up 42% from the same period last year. Despite the increase, Wall Street economists had forecast greater margins, reviving concerns among some investors that demand for Teslas may be softening amid economic upheaval and increased competition in the electric vehicle market. Let's now resume our discussion on the state of the British economy by focusing on the future of young people, many of whom have had a difficult few years due to a disruption in their lifestyles stemming from the COVID-19 lockdowns. According to a new report conducted by the Prince's Trust, a significant number of British young people aged between 16 to 25 are worried they won't be able to afford food this winter as the cost of living crisis spirals. The survey of 2,000 young people also found that a quarter said they have skipped meals to cut back on spending, and 14% have used a food bank at least once in the past 12 months. For a real-life perspective, I was earlier joined in the studio by Daniel Ogoloma, an entrepreneur and Oxford University undergraduate. Daniel Ogoloma, it's an absolute pleasure to have you in the studio. It's been a couple of years. I know you're a very busy man, according to social media, but it is an important topic because we've discussed on this programme extensively over the past 6 months, the cost of living crisis. We know it's impacting young people. You are a young man yourself. How is it impacting the people that you're close to or those that you used to know?
Well, first of all, Juliana, thank you for having me. The cost of living crisis in the UK right now, it's at a very crucial stage. Everything's expensive. You know, furniture's expensive, energy bills are expensive, food is expensive, and young people just can't cope. Especially those who are just graduating and coming out into the real world. They're trying to kind of find their footing in society, and it's very difficult. I think they call us the rent generation now. Yeah. Well, look, we can't get on the housing ladder. And what people are then doing is they're going into drugs. People are stealing. There's the crime rate, especially in the city where we are right now, has soared through the roof because nothing is affordable. So people are having to find other means, especially young people, finding other means to survive.
Yeah, it's a good thing you spoke about crime because we did discuss this with the Bedfordshire Crime Commissioner a couple of weeks ago. Gang-related crimes is really high in the UK, and I know it does affect a lot of Nigerians and Nigerian children living here. I want to talk about the kind of perception of young blacks because I know you're part of a movement that celebrate being young and being black and being educated and being talented, but not everyone feels that way. And I think these comments that were made last week by Rupa Huq, who is a pretty popular Labour MP, she said, she's since apologised, that Kwasi Kwarteng, the UK Chancellor, couldn't be black because he doesn't sound black. And he went to Eton and all these other private schools.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel, particularly as we know there are so many young blacks that feel the same way? They think, you know, if you're black and you're a conservative, you're not a proper black person. But yet, then again, how are they supposed to aspire?
I think it's quite disgraceful, those comments. And it showed a lot of cracks within the Labour Party and how they see or define being black. The comments she made, I believe, were from her heart. I think she genuinely believes
they
that
were
because
racist.
they were extremely racist. And the effect of what she said on the black community is heavy, because like you said, young black people already believe that if you're in the Conservative Party or you're part of the establishment and you're black, then you're somewhat of a coconut, being black on the outside but white inside. And she's played into that narrative. And what she's done is she's just kind of set back a whole generation of young black people who are trying to achieve a certain height. And they're thinking, okay, if I'm going to speak posh, then I'm on the right side, or if I've got to be hood, I've got to speak with slang. And it's sad. It's very sad, actually.
It is quite sad. I want to shift away because we don't have much time, which is such a shame, Daniel, because I rarely get an opportunity to speak to you.
Yeah.
But I did see, I don't know if I want to call it a campaign video. You are an undergraduate at Oxford. We
Yes,
shouldn't let the designer brands fool you. You are a very intelligent individual. I know you've worked on campaigns for very senior British politicians and also Nigerian politicians too. We know that the campaign season has just started ahead of February's election. Do you think diaspora participation is fundamental? Because I know it's always been a buzzword, diaspora. You know, we send home billions every year, but then, of course, we're not eligible to vote. But what is your sense on what's happening in youth participation in general in next year's election?
I think, as it currently stands, there's no bill that allows you to vote abroad. So you have to actually go back to Nigeria and vote with your PVC. Even if you have a PVC here in the UK, there's nothing you can do with it. It's going to sit down on election day and you can't use it. But in terms of diaspora involvement, the most we can do is help with fundraising and help with awareness. If you like a candidate, use your social media, use your media, use whatever you can.
Does social media work? That's the thing at the moment. There are some candidates who will remain nameless who are doing exceptional on social media.
Yeah.
But, social media and Twitter is not, where you place your vote.
But at least that's where it starts. It starts with the awareness, letting people know that this candidate or whoever it is exists. That's the first step. Because at the end of the day, there are two candidates who are extremely popular, and there's one who came out of nowhere, really, and that's because of the media. So there's a lot of people in the diaspora who are supporting him on social media and in the media, and I think that's where it kind of ends in the diaspora, really. Yeah. There's not much that we can do other than lend our voice and our finances for now.
Are you happy with the state of Nigeria at the moment? You know, are you going to be using your Oxford degree to go back to Nigeria and change when millions are doing the opposite? You know, they're leaving Nigeria in their droves because they just cannot afford to stay.
Most certainly, definitely. I think in the future, I'll definitely be using what I'm learning here in the UK to go back and help build Nigeria, because I think it's imperative that those who have a neutral perspective and they're not bound by tribe or religion and things like that, they have a holistic approach to building back Nigeria to where it needs to be. And I think a lot of us in the diaspora have that opportunity because we have that outside overview of the country. So yes, definitely, I think it's something I'd look into in the future.
Yeah, make sure you have a Channels Business Global camera crew with you. Just lastly, Daniel, before I let you go, there are millions of yous that are watching this show. What message of hope would you give to them, especially because they are feeling quite hopeless, and not just in Nigeria, here and across the world right now?
What I would say is your current location does not determine your future destination. I said this to a group of young people last week, and what it basically means is where you are today does not necessarily define where you're going to be tomorrow. And I know it sounds very cliche, but this location I'm talking about is in the mind. Yeah. It starts with you thinking positively and actively working towards working on your mind. And if you work on your mind, your actions will change, and hopefully your life will change, and then you can affect your community on a larger scale.
Yeah, I think you've got to start with thinking positive, haven't you? Even if your environment doesn't reflect that. Daniel Ogoloma, entrepreneur, a government consultant and Oxford University undergraduate. Thank you so much for your time today. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.